Milton Winter, thank you so much for being with us today. I know everyone is going to be so happy to hear what you have to say. Um, Tell us what years you were at Fourth and in what capacity.
I was an assistant pastor at Fourth, which is something like an assistant or an associate professor in the universities. I was the youngest person on the ministerial staff, and I arrived in 1977 as a beginning seminarian, and then as I went through seminary in the different years, I came back in the summers of 79 to 83 as a summer intern, and then was assistant pastor in 1984 to 86. And an assistant pastor was an office that the Presbyterian Church had in those days that gave young ministers sort of an opportunity to come to a church before they'd really had a chance to prove themselves. And Fourth Church was very kind to include me that way.
How did Fourth influence or broaden your ideas or experiences regarding church?
Well, like I think almost everybody who lives in Chicago, I came to the city from somewhere else. I was born in a small town. I was reared in a small church. My Presbyterian church in Cleveland, Mississippi, down in the Mississippi Delta, was a wonderful, loving congregation, and I'm so grateful to have been reared in church. I learned a great deal just from my growing up in church. I was a 50s kid, and looking back, you can say that my church life in Mississippi was, well, a kind word for it would be provincial. It was conservative, it was traditional, but it was also before the battle lines had been drawn, when things between conservative and liberal became so polarized. And so here I was at Fourth Church, just sort of a country kid. No one ever took me aside and said, look, country mouse, you've got to get with our program. But people at Fourth gently took me by the hand and taught me to lift up my eyes, to look around and see how much more there was to life and ministry in the big city and in the wider Presbyterian Church. While I was an intern at Fourth, my home church went through a terrible, terrible split over these fundamentalist progressive issues. That was before I was ordained, and Fourth Church literally shepherded me through this crisis and helped me to stay in touch with the mainline Presbyterian Church. I really think you could say that Fourth Church saved me for the PCUSA. I would not really have had support in that time without Fourth Church.
Well, that's wonderful. Tell us about the early days of summer day, tutoring, and other community outreach programs at the church.
Dr. Davies wanted to start a summer program so that the children wouldn't fall behind or forget during the summer what they had learned in school. And so I was part of the first group to put on a summer program for the kids from Cabrini Green. It was a small operation. We were all volunteer. We just had a tiny budget. We hired 3 teachers from the Chicago public schools. One was a Catholic nun, and she was very, very brusque and disciplinary, and really got the kids lined up and doing what they should do. But the other 2 turned out to be from my hometown down in Mississippi. They were a young Black couple, and we were exactly the same age, but we hadn't known each other because the schools in my hometown were segregated. And so we had wonderful conversations and enjoyed visits and dinners in each other's homes. And it was just something that didn't happen down south yet in those days. So the summer day program was really very good for me that year too. One day I encountered an angry church member in the reception area at the church office. She'd seen the summer day children playing in the parking lot. And I'm going to quote her. She said, those children have no place around frolicking in the house of God. And it went all over me. And so I'm afraid I did not answer her in proper Presbyterian decorum. And so she turned around and she went off in a huff. And as I calmed down a little bit and turned to go back upstairs to the office, who should I run into but Grace Davies, Mrs. Davies, and she'd witnessed the whole thing. And I wondered how she was going to react. Well, I didn't have to wonder long because she just came up to me and threw her arms around me and said, "Oh, Milton, I'm so proud of you. Thank you for what you said." Mrs. Davies was elegant and reserved, and that was a very demonstrative action for her to take. So it meant a great deal to me to be supported by the church in that way.
Thank you so much for sharing that incident or sharing that anecdote. Thank you for sharing that
anecdote. One thing more
anecdote.
I might say, now the directors of the tutoring program and Center for Whole Life and all have credentialed, professionally trained people. I don't know that there were credentials that you could get when we were doing this. We just had to figure it out as we went along. We had a wonderful time doing it, but it was a new thing, at least in the Presbyterian world, so far as I know, to do these kinds of outreaches in a city church.
Thank you so much. Switching subjects right now, what was the invitation committee and what was its role?
The invitation committee goes all the way back to the days of John Timothy Stone. It was a group, when I worked with it, it was a group of 10 or 15 church members, all different ages, men and women, different types of personalities, but the committee would get the visitors cards that people filled out on Sunday morning. And we would contact these people to answer their questions, tell them more about church programs, invite them into membership. And the committee people were discreet. They developed a sense of how to talk to people. And we found out that many people wanted to visit, wanted to sit in the back pews and in the shadows and just kind of check us out. And then after some months, sometimes even 12 to 18 months, they would come and say they were ready to join. But the committee would take people to lunch, call them, not pester them, but call them from time to time, send notes, cards. And the invitation committee through the years just brought hundreds of people into the life of Fourth Church. And again, I don't know of another church that really ever had anything like it. The committee also developed strong friendships with each other, of course. And when John Buchanan came, he wanted to step up this process. We were getting more inquiries than the committee could keep up with. So he took steps to multiply the effort. And at that point, the church's membership really began to take off. And of course, it doubled under John's pastorate.
Going back to Elam Davies, what did you learn from him and how would you describe his leadership style?
First and foremost, Dr. Davies was a preacher. I have really never known anyone like him. His sermons were so intensely personal in the way that people perceive them. The house lights would be darkened. Sometimes he would even ask a rhetorical question and someone out in the congregation would actually answer it as if he was just talking to that person. They'd forget themselves and feel they were in a conversation. You know, many preachers give what I call, I don't know, a learned essay and, you know, a commentary on the biblical text and human problems. But Dr. Davies really preached soul to soul. I had never really understood the concept of unconditional acceptance by God fully, well, as fully as one can, until I began to listen to him preach. He spent time mentoring me. He allowed me to sample every aspect of the church's life. He let me moderate session meetings. Um, and I would often drive him to appointments around the city. And that was a wonderful one-on-one time where he could just give me advice about how to be a good minister when I had a church of my own.
In addition to Dr. Davies, who were some of the people who influenced you at Fourth?
I was there during, after Dr. Davies, I served under Jack Stotts, who was the president of McCormick Seminary at the time and was the interim minister for 18 months after Dr. Davies retired. Became very close to Jack and his wife, Virginia. She had gone to my little college down in Mississippi, of all things. And then I was there during the first years of John Buchanan. So along with Morgan and Mary Simmons and Mary Alice Abel, the director of religious education, John and Kathy Boyle, Dave and Katie Donovan, Jim and Esther Fleming, the Dave Handleys, Deborah Capp, Tony Ruger, Karen Maurer, who succeeded Mary Alice as director of the day school, Linda Loving, Johnny Talbert, who was the director of the Elam Davies Outreach Center, Jeanette Krennick, Craig Barnes, Martha Reed, who was the treasurer, Bob Wheat. It was a time of many transitions, serving under three ministers. But for me, a young minister, that was wonderful to see and work with three different excellent pastors, each of whom, of course, had their own style and way of doing things.
I know many people will be interested in your response to this question. Please tell us about the 1985 Bears playing in the Super Bowl and what it was like at the church.
Well, I had the privilege of preaching at the Vesper service that night, the night that the Bears won the Super Bowl, January 26, 1986, their one and only. The Vesper service in those days was held in the sanctuary. The crowd was not large, but it was open to Michigan Avenue, and we wanted to make it as easy for people to come in as they could. Given the excitement around the occasion, we asked the session if the Vesper service might be canceled in favor of watching the game. This, for this one time. And the elders believed that the service needed to go forward. None of them committed to attend, I might add. So there were 13 worshipers in the entire sanctuary that seats 1,200 people, plus 15 or so in Dr. Simmons' evening choir. We had a wonderful old houseman named Walter Markovich. I could tell you a whole interview about Walter, but he walked over to the chancel uninvited and handed up notes to me in the pulpit when scores occurred. I noticed that the ushers were way in the back. They had a small TV with earplugs, and foolishly, I chose to preach about football. Dr. Simmons told me I'd made a terrible mistake. He said these were the few people in all of Chicago that cared so little about the Super Bowl that they came to church as usual. And he said, "What did you do but preach to them about the Super Bowl?" the euphoria on Michigan Avenue. I know there are a lot of parades on Michigan Avenue and things, but I never saw a wild crowd. Dr. Simmons and I stayed at the church until quite late. We just didn't dare get out, and he gave me a lift to my apartment in his car. Uh, but that was really an occasion. I'll never forget it.
Are there some special memories from your time at Fourth that you'd like to share with us above and beyond what you've already told me?
I just want to say it was such an experience to come up from Mississippi to the big city. As a single gay man, Fourth Church literally became my family. It was my heart and home, and I'll always love it. But, there came a time when I realized that I was needed in Mississippi. So the church, having gone through the terrible split down there, they were really very, very short of mainstream Presbyterian ministers. So I made the decision that I needed to take what I had learned and go back to my own people and serve there, which I did for a whole nother lifetime. But that's a story for a different day. I hope that Fourth Church will continue to be a place where young ministers can be formed. We were all generalists in those days, and they let me into every aspect of the church's life and ministry, and really taught me how to be the minister of my own church. And that was a huge, wonderful experience for a seminarian and a young minister.